Welcome, salam, and shalom to this episode of the Habibi Kiosk. This time we're going to talk about a problem and issue that has been challenging to most, if not all, European countries, and that is the rise of right-wing extremism. So when we prepared for this topic, we felt that there were two spaces that are often ignored in the analysis of right-wing extremism. And there's, on the one hand, the local, the very local, like buildings, streets, neighborhoods, and then on the other side, the transnational. So how do right-wing extremists get together across national contexts? We felt that those two areas, two spaces are often ignored, maybe because we mostly understand right-wing extremism as something that is a national process. So we will look at those two things today. And then the other thing that we thought we would look at critically is the idea of right-wing spaces. So what is a right-wing space? Is there even such a thing as a non-right-wing or like a free space, free of ideology or not? And are there maybe right-wing spaces that we're not aware of and that we are kind of blind to? And I'm going to talk about this topic with a group of really amazing guests that I'm first going to introduce to you. Some of them here in Munich, some in Italy. So in Italy, we have Paola Pisciotano. Hi, Paola, who's an artist working in live performance and sound intervention. And she's currently working on a theater project that did research on the topic of the right-wing influence on teenagers. Then there's also Julian Foltz. Hi, Julian.
Hi.
And he works at the Goethe-Instituts in Brussels and is one of the people there responsible for the cultural program. And he also works on the topic of right-wing extremism in a project called Uncivil Society. And he's going to tell us about it more in a little bit. Then there's also Robert Andreas. Hi, Robert. Who's actually from Munich, but in Venice at the moment. And he works as a journalist, researcher, and writer, and he's probably one of the people most knowledgeable about right-wing extremism in Germany, and probably often also knows more than the relevant authorities on the topic. And then here with me in Munich, I'm very glad to have Haveen Al-Sindi with me, who's an artist based in Germany and Kurdistan. She grew up in the Kurdish Autonomous Region in Iraq, and she works in conceptual and visual art. And she deals with the topics of memory, location, and uprooting. So we have people from a variety of disciplines, which I'm very happy and excited about, who will share their perspectives and their work. So the first question, to do an introductory round, maybe each of you could explain how does your work involve the engagement with right-wing spaces? And maybe we will start in Italy, and let's start with Robert, because you're sitting in the middle.
Okay, thank you. If you think like a right-wing thinker, your thinking is based on inequality of people. And it's not accidentally that this thinking means that there is a fixation on space. The thinking is marked in spaces and it constructs spaces. And that's not abstract at all. If you think in frontiers, for example, the racist thinking leads to the marking, the demarcation of frontiers. And you have, if you are working on the right-wing spectrum, you have the different phenomena. On local scene, I can report from 600 manifestations, anti-Muslim, racist, anti-Semitic, neo-fascist manifestation in the Munich pedestrian zone. In the middle of the Munich city, 600 racist manifestations in 3 years from 2015 to 2018. Or actually, we had in the last 16 months, 300 manifestations from a conspiracy theorist-led, dominated Corowan rebel scene. And so you have a dynamic in in right-wing movement, in right-wing parties, in right-wing thinking and right-wing discourse in German society that is fixed in spaces. If you think on Eastern Germany and the election, the election results, you have the space Eastern Germany. Or if you think you have Dortmund-Dorstfeld as a base from right-wing theme, we have Dortmund-Dorstfeld as a space.
All right, thank you very much. And so as a journalist and a researcher, you always have to deal with spaces and maybe go to these spaces as well to understand how right-wing mobilization works.
The extreme right tries to step into the public space. That's not only for propaganda purposes, but it's a symbol, not only symbol, it's very materialistic. This public space, the Munich city, is ours and not yours. The discourse is totally dominated by us and our racist manifestation. And for myself, I'm taking part in hundreds of right-wing manifestations and actions a year in the whole southern German region. And I know this more than symbolic way to go into the cities, to go into public space.
All right, we'll talk about this more later, of course, but let's continue with the introductory round. And maybe Paola, do you want to continue? How does your work involve spaces, right-wing spaces?
I especially work with students, with teenagers, and so my research is linked to schools, so public spaces like schools. And so it's very interesting. We were talking about it in our last debate this afternoon. And because it's very interesting to observe it as in schools, you have a vacuum left by the left. And so this vacuum is often used by some extreme right movements to keep young people who can be fascinated by the ideology, I don't know, but by the need of belonging to a group. And so, yes, I work especially with schools and with students. And also I met young militants of extreme right groups in Belgium. And one time I invited one of the leader of a group whose name is Skillenbrind, to came to a public debate in a public space, but he didn't accept because they have to choose. They want to choose the public spaces. It's what about I think when you talk about public space.
Yeah, thank you. I thought what was very interesting what you said, that there's a vacuum, so there's not really a neutral space. As soon as there is a vacuum, somebody tries to get into that vacuum and influence space. So it seems to always be contested. Maybe we'll move to Julian now. We'll talk about your project later in more detail, but maybe you can give us a quick introduction how you work with right-wing spaces.
Yes, in order not to tell too much about the project, but we at the Goethe-Instituts in Brussels, this year we work together with the Goethe-Instituts in Oslo, in Milan and in Budapest on a project which is called Answer with Society. And what we are working on is, or what we want to tackle with our project is the transnational dimension of racist violence and neo-Nazi terror. And so, I mean, on a basic level, one could say Europe is a kind of a right-wing space if we understand right-wing spaces as spaces of exclusion, where violence is used against them who are deemed to be worse of being excluded. And I think we find all over Europe places like this. And perhaps this is the spatial dimension of the work, the project I'm engaged at the moment with. Europe as a space of racist violence in the United States.
Many thanks. All right, and then let's move to our guest here in Munich, Javier. Could you give us a short overview of how you deal with space and right-wing spaces?
Sehr gerne. Ich werde auf Deutsch sprechen. Danke für die Übersetzung. Also mich interessiert vor allem die Einbettung in der Erinnerungskultur, also wie rechte Räume plötzlich in der Erinnerung manifestiert werden und wie diese hinterfragt werden und welche Rolle eigentlich diese urbanen Räume haben, also zum Beispiel Plätze.
Maybe we'll do it in a little bit. So she said that she works on spaces in memory culture. Yeah. Sorry, we have to do it in shorter bits and pieces.
Kein
Maybe
Problem. Und wie die sich in unserer Erinnerung manifestieren und wie wir mit diesen urbanen Räumen umgehen dann.
All right, and how these spaces get manifested in our memory and how we deal with these urban spaces.
Genau, und auf der biologischen Ebene, dass diese Erinnerungen auch zu wahren Bildern in unseren Gehirnen manifestiert werden.
And on a biological level, how these images turn into real images these spaces turn into real images in our memory.
Genau, und ich beschäftige mich damit, was passiert, wenn man genau diese Erinnerung verbildlicht, in die Öffentlichkeit bringt.
And what Haveen does is to find out what happens when we give an image to these memories and bring them into public space. I guess. Yeah, very interesting. Later we're going to look at some of her projects to make it more concrete. And let's start with a more in-depth question about right-wing extremism, and maybe this question is going to go to you, Robert. So it seems often also the authorities, when they try to find out or when they look at right-wing extremism, they focus very much on the national and maybe don't understand that there are networks that go beyond national boundaries, maybe even beyond Europe. How important are these networks?
The extreme right wing is a heterogeneous scene and with different phenomena, international, but they are linked together. What they have in common is their ideology. The ideology of anti-Semitism in first row, the ideology of what they call great replacement, a racist theory, pretending the replacement of European inhabitants and European people. And they have the big column of anti-feminist, homophobic, anti-LGBTQI ideology. This is what they have in common, and their structures are not based only in national frame. Their structures can have transnational or international or worldwide networks. For example, the International Terrorist Network of Combat 18, the militant neo-Nazi network of Blood and Honor. But you also find phenomena in different countries over decades. For example, the neo-Nazis all over the world made bank robberies, and in the 1970s in Italy, the NAR. In the 1980s, the German Nazi scene made series of bank robberies and burglaries. And when nationalsozialistischer Untergrund made 15 bank robberies in the 1990s and 2000s, the police didn't thought in their inquiries of the German neo-Nazi scene. Never ever was in the head of police in the whole German region that neo-Nazis need money for the underground, need money for their actions and weapons, and they do series of bank robberies. And you can make identical examples for nail bombings, for example. David Copeland bombed London 3 times, and after the Kotzstraßenattentat, it was New Scotland Yard from England who gave the German police advice. No one in the German police knew about nail bombings outside of Germany. And today in the digital area, you have transnational organizations on a digital level. If you think an Atomwaffen division or Feuerkrieg division, transnational networks from militant right-wingers who engage themselves, who motivate themselves to assassinations and attacks.
So there isn't just a flow of ideas, but there's also a flow of money and real-life support. Is that maybe also the connection that we could find between the very local level, like right-wing extremists, organization buying up property, and that transnational connection? Is that one of the links?
From time to time, that's the background. If you think on the actions of militant enemies of abortion, for example, the anti-choice movement international is linked, and there's a big money flow from Spain initiatives to German organizations, for example. But it's not the problem is not the big financier in the background. The problem is the ideology, and it's worldwide the same ideology, and this ideology motivates the participants in the right-wing scene to violence, to discriminate, to act violently, and to act in a terrorist way.
Julian and Paola, so in your project, or in your projects, you also looked at right-wing extremists in different European countries. So what did you find? Did you find that there was really like, were these ideologies really parallel? Were they basically the same? Or did you notice some differences between the different countries?
There are a lot of analogies, a lot of things that there's teenagers have in common, like neo-nationalist ideology, or exclusion, okay? An espèce de, okay, in French, a link with violence, a problem with LGBT community, and in Greece, in Belgium, and in Italy, but also in France, with some teenagers say that they see in Trump or Putin some good leaders, and then something very strange, such as nostalgia of a period that they didn't know really, because they didn't know what the fascism was. And so you have some young people who say, yes, we have to came back like in the fascist period, or I'm a Gaullist. What the fuck, you're 15 years old? You want to be a Gaullist? So very strange. And also at the basis, there is a fear about the economical crisis, about the immigration, about all the changes in the society. So I think that, at the basis, if you want to resume everything, the fear has a big part in this phenomenon. Yeah,
the link is also white supremacy, I guess, and there are also some some people, some terrorists that have become international role models for right-wing terrorists, like the terrorist of Utøya in Norway, who many people afterwards looked up to and cited and wanted to emulate. So Julian, your engagement with it, did you also notice that there were some things that united all these people across countries, or did you maybe also notice some national differences?
It's a hard question, but because I think what unites right-wing movements everywhere around the world, Robert and Paola already said quite nice. Or it's not nice, but it's a good resume. And yeah, I think this is the basis. So let me think. I mean, there are always like national specificities linked to the context. For instance, we are the Goethe-Institut in Budapest. They are working together with a crew from the Roma community, which is called Romano Teatro, and they developed a piece on a series of murders on Roma people in 2008, 2009, which was really horrible. And now they already presented it in September in Budapest, and there was a protest of Hungarian nationalists who were claiming that this was anti-Hungarian and stating that in Hungary there would be a problem with anti-Roma racism. Yeah, I think, for instance, this is a context which is more specific in Hungary and in, I don't know, in Belgium, for instance, the racism is more against people who immigrated 2 or 3 generations ago from Maghreb countries or from Turkey. But I think what's always the same is the hate against everyone who's not the same or is not perceived as the same.
Hate as a driving force, yes. Let's maybe go back to the issue of space. So we have these free-floating ideologies that people take from and get inspired from, but then these ideologies also structure and inscribe and shape space. And talking about Germany and Italy, so Germany and Italy both have a history of fascism. Space here is not neutral. It speaks of that history in its landscape, in its architecture. And the question is, we don't even have to look at right-wing extremist movements nowadays, but how the world we live in is structured. So to build a society that is truly anti-racist, anti-fascist, do we have to engage with this legacy? And if we have to do that, how do we do it? And I would first pose this question to Habibi.
Eine sehr wichtige Frage. Ich glaube, es ist total wichtig, erstmal sich klaren zu werden, dass es ein Akt ist, der nicht aufhört und aufhören wird.
So Habibi is saying that we have to realize that this is an activity, an action that is never going to stop, that we'll have to keep on pursuing.
Denn ich möchte mal ganz kurz darauf eingehen, wie international das geworden ist. Also selbst in Irak gibt es Verbindungen zu faschistischen, zu der IS, mit der neonationalistischen Community, die hier in Deutschland lebt.
And she wants to say how international it has become. So in Iraq, there are connections between the so-called Islamic State and neo-Nazis in Europe.
Und deswegen müssen wir vielleicht mehr darüber reden, welche Rolle wir in dieser Gesellschaft einnehmen und wie wir das sichtbar machen. Reicht es eine Begegnung durch Gespräche, ja?
So we have to talk more about what role we're going to take in this society and how we make this legacy, I guess, visible. So is it enough to talk about this history?
Oder vielleicht einfach wirklich sichtbar, deutlich machen, wo das stattfindet und wie es stattfindet.
Or do we actually have to make it visible in space, I guess, how it took place and how it's still taking place?
Genau, bezogen auf Deutschland und Italien finde ich total wichtig, dass selbst der rechte Raum in der Architektur manifestiert ist.
So looking at Italy and Germany, right-wing ideology space is even manifested in the architecture of these places.
Und wenn wir über die Venedig-Biennale nachdenken und den deutschen Pavillon uns angucken, ist sie zu hinterfragen, welches Recht oder welche rechte Räume sind in diesem Gebäude eigentlich schon längst manifestiert, obwohl wir das immer wieder bespielen mit politischen, künstlerischen Arbeiten, aber das Gebäude steht.
And so, looking at the Venice Biennale, the German pavilion, we have to ask ourselves, how is that also inscribed with right-wing ideologies? Although we keep on bespielen, meinst du darüber reden?
Also, dass wir Ausstellungen gegen...
Although we keep on having exhibitions against this and panel discussions, like we work against it, but how are these structures still there, these right-wing structures?
Und nur ein letzter Punkt, dann gebe ich gerne ab, ist in der Frage, die du gestellt hast, total wichtig herauszuarbeiten, in welcher Sprache wir darüber kommunizieren. Also welche Sprache verwenden wir, um über diese rechte Räume zu sprechen? Weil das ist das, was ich meine, das manifestiert sich in der Erinnerung und diese Erinnerung wird plötzlich real, weil wir so darüber sprechen.
And so, engaging with these kind of spaces, we really have to think about what language we're going to use, because memory also gets manifested in language. Yeah, very important points. So I'm gonna move on to the next person to answer that question about how to engage with this legacy of space inscribed by ideologies. Julian, do you want to go next?
No, I would go for it.
Sure, you can pass it on.
Yeah, you always have to remember this history, and you find it in public space, and it's a big movement till to the election of right wing, when voters vote right wing parties. You have often the same regions in Germany as the regions with the best results for right-wing parties as in National Socialist area. You have persistent structures from the history, and you have same persistence with right-wing organizations, even if they are changed, even if every 5 years there are another structure and movement onwards. You have a history of discrimination, of violence and terrorism, and it's written in the German cities and written in the German space. And the important thing for me is the discourse. Right-wingers want to take part in the discourse for decades, and you have to decide who can participate in German discourse, who can decide, who can speak, who will be heard, and who not.
Paola, do you want to comment on this question as well?
Yeah, I was thinking about memory and the necessity to work about memory, because, for example, in Italy, you have a lot of fascist buildings, where you can find on the facade, sulla façade, Viva il Duce, and so you think, what? Okay, and nobody covered this kind. Nobody. Okay, in my village, for example, I come from a very little city, and in the place, the big place in the center of the village, we always have this building with the écriture, with
writing
Viva il Duce, and I think that we have to do our work about memory, and we can conserve it. I think that we can. Yes, it belongs to our history, but we have to write next to the building, for example, why there is. You can read Viva il Duce now, okay, and Yes, just also to say the work on the memory, I think is very, very, very necessary, because I always met some young people who thought that my parents did the Second World War, but no. Maybe my grandfather, but not my parents. Okay, so yes, there is a work about memory that we have to do as artists and researchers or institutions, and because it's so important.
Yeah, memory for sure, and maybe also shaping space in a different way. But we'll talk about this more later when we talk about Havin's projects, for example. But the next thing I want to do is kind of challenge this idea of what a right-wing space is. So I think many of us, if we hear the word right-wing spaces, we think of right-wing clubhouses or party centers. But I'm sure these are not the only places in which right-wing ideologies are trying to gain ground. So what else could be a right-wing space? Whoever wants to go first and expand our idea, chip in. Sure, go for it.
Ich glaube, was in dem ganzen Diskurs, also ich finde ganz wichtig, dass es auch genannt wurde, dass es ein Diskurs ist, wird das Bildungssystem in Deutschland ein bisschen von diesem rechten Raum vorab gesehen. Also man geht davon aus, dass vor allem in Schulen über Rechte, über Rassismus, Diskriminierung gesprochen wird, was aber nicht... Also Entschuldigung.
Right. No problem. All right, so Havin is saying that in our discourse we often feel the education system is a space in which we're aware of right-wing extremism and talk about racism and right-wing extremism and are, I think, working against it. That is the assumption. But I think there is a but coming.
Genau, ein großes But. Wenn man sich die Schulbücher anguckt oder auch die Kernlehrpläne, die in den ganzen Bundesländern manifestiert sind übrigens, so manifestiert, dass die Lehrkräfte, die ausgebildet werden, sich daran orientieren, dann wird man sehen, dass diese Reformen, diese Lehrkernlehrpläne aus der Vergangenheit kommen, aus der Historie, wo noch Schule anders gedacht war. Trotzdem lernen wir danach.
All right, so for example, you see it in the books that are used in schools and in the syllabi that are used in schools that teachers have to follow in Germany, that there is still kind of from a past in which the idea of teaching, was still, I guess, formed by right-wing ideologies.
Ja. Und nicht nur das, sondern dass LehrerInnen sich weigern, über den Zweiten Weltkrieg zu sprechen, weil denen das zu alt geworden ist. Den Bezug zu der eigenen Gegenwart nicht gefunden wird oder den rechten Raum in anderen Nationalitäten, nicht den, mit denen in Deutschland ist, verbinden.
So, for example, Havin is saying that teachers don't want to talk about the Second World War so much anymore because it has become too old for them. They've lost their connection with it, and they fail to connect it to our present.
Und wenn man sich jetzt die Stellen der Direktion anguckt, dann wird man klar, dass auch da die alte Vorstellung über das Lehren, über die deutsche Geschichte noch vorhanden ist. Also nämlich, dass man das in der Oberstufe nur mal tut.
So there's still very old-fashioned ideas about how to teach about German history. So you only do it when students have entered high school level.
Genau, und bis zu einem Grad, nämlich die Geschichte wird gar nicht weit vertieft, sondern
and to a certain degree, so you don't really go into depth when it goes to teaching history.
Genau, und das Bildungssystem ist nicht bereit, den Diskurs zu öffnen, wie wir das jetzt heute zum Beispiel machen.
So the education system is not really ready to open the discourse when it comes to a culture of memory, I guess, how we're doing
also für mich nochmal, um zusammenzufassen, ist einer der rechten Räume, die auf jeden Fall ignoriert wird, ist das Bildungssystem, vor allem die Schulen.
So one of the right spaces that we ignore or don't talk enough about is our educational system. All right. What about you guys in Venice? Do you want to comment on that or talk about other spaces that are contested by right-wing ideas that we often overlook or don't think of?
Perhaps it's a little bit provocative, but you have a right-wing continent I would say you have a deadly continent with deadly frontiers and discriminations all over every European country and nation. And but on a local level, you have rechte Räume, you have right-wing spaces who are often not detected as such one. This could be local parliaments, for example, municipalities, the mayor's houses and offices, where decisions were made who discriminate people and where power is used for racist migration policy, for example. That's often overlooked. Such smaller parliaments on a local level can have a discriminative impact, even in not only the parliament as a place itself, as a space itself, but if they take made a decision, racist decision, for example, it can have the effects in a town quarter far away from this local parliament. And one other example could be the sceneries of terrorist attacks. The sceneries of anti-Semitic and racist attacks, they stay, and the affected, the victims, their ancestors and minorities, they know, oh, this has been the place where someone of us has been killed, or where we are in danger, and for this scenery of an attack, of an assassination, is a symbol. Even if there's no memory on the victims, no memory on the attack, or if the victims play no role in this remembrance policy.
So yeah, public space in general, I would say, is threatened space, threatened by right-wing extremism. So whether it's a synagogue, a shopping center like 2016 in Munich, public transport, for example, as well. And yeah, all of this space is contested, and it also probably depends on who you are, how you feel about that space, whether it's space you feel safe and secure and comfortable in, or whether it's space that you feel threatened in. Yeah, Julian and Paola, do you also want to comment on this question?
I mean, I would totally agree with Andreas. We should not think of right-wing spaces as something at the fringes of society, but they are deeply inscribed in the structures, in the geography of our societies. And as I said in the beginning, I mean, all spaces of exclusion and which have also inscribed the potentiality of violence, they are sort of right-wing spaces. And already if we look at how segregated space in our cities is today, we have to state that they are a sort of right-wing places. And perhaps, yeah, and I think spaces, yeah, is never neutral. Yeah.
Yes, I agree with you guys. Totally, yeah. But I think also that we can start from the public spaces where we work, like theaters or cultural spaces or cultural institutions, because you have discrimination also in these kind of spaces, because you are a woman or because you are black, for the color of your skin, or because you're gay, because, yeah. And so, yeah, you can find discrimination also every day where you work, in spaces that are against discrimination, that they discriminate, because it's in our culture.
Yeah, so
there is a very nice book about this subject. Maybe you know a writer whose name was Furio Iesi, who wrote about our, the name of the book is Cultura di Destra, Right Culture, and he explained how our culture at the basis it's a right culture, and so it belongs to the right ideology belongs to our culture.
Yeah, no, what I get from all of you is that we shouldn't just think of neo-Nazis when it comes to the structuring of space by extremist ideologies like racism, anti-Semitism also structure who gets into a university, who gets an apartment or not, who gets to live in which neighborhood. So it's a problem that all of us have, kind of, and not just the fringe movements. But then, of course, we can also act against that. So we can also intervene and try to change spaces. So what strategies have artists, activists, society in general, what kind of interventions can we do to work against the spread of right-wing space? Who wants to go first? Sure, go ahead, Robert. Yeah.
For me, the important thing is to listen to those who are affected most, who are affected from right-wing ideologies. For example, from racist discrimination. I have to listen to others because I'm not a victim of racist discrimination in Germany, and we have to learn, we have to listen to those affected. And another point could be the remembrance, not to forget what happened in these countries, not to forget the murdered, those who died at the frontiers or in right-wing extremist actions, not to forget racist mobilizations, not to forget pogroms, anti-Semitic attacks, to have it in mind and not to be astonished every week from a new single case. That means take it serious, take it serious as an ideological problem, and take it serious as a problem of whole society, not only the problem of a small group on the right, on the very right side of the frame of society.
And maybe also to take up space. So you were talking about all these right-wing demonstrations that are happening in Munich and in many other cities, to maybe be there as well and not give over space to extremists.
Yeah, for sure. To take the public space back and to write another history in public space, the history of equality and tolerance, and not of discrimination and violence.
And so we'll now talk about artistic interventions that all of you have been involved in. And maybe Paola will start with, and Julian will start with your project. Should we show the video clip first and then you talk about it? Or do you want to give a quick introduction first?
It's a good question. Yes, maybe I can contextualize just the theater show I created. So yes, I said that 3 years ago I started an inquiry in 4 countries, so Italy, France, Greece, and Belgium, about the influence of extreme right rhetorics, but also populist, nationalist rhetorics on the new generations. And so this material is the basis matter for the show. And so in the show you have a lot, a great part of the show is is based on the interviews I realized.
So should we show the video clip and then we'll talk about it again? So you'll see a quick snippet, a short snippet from a play written and directed by Paola.
In Italia è una bestemmia dire questa cosa, cioè il facilitare l'utilizzo delle armi per la popolazione, per appunto, per difendersi.
E alle elezioni del 2017 avresti votato Trump o Hillary Clinton?
Ma sono entrambi candidati che io non avrei mai voluto alle elezioni americane. Non avrei mai voluto un Trump o una Hillary. Ci sono tante discussioni perché Trump ha vinto. Ci sono queste conspiracies che riguardano la Russia che è intervenuta alle elezioni americane perché Trump ha vinto, dove Trump ha... Cioè, c'è tanta ipocrisia nel media americano quanto ce n'è nel media italiano soprattutto. E la maggior parte della gente ci crede. Oppure queste continue accuse di razzismo nei confronti di Trump. È vero, alcune volte ha utilizzato parole che non doveva utilizzare. Però l'immigrazione illegale costa molto per gli americani, 150 miliardi di dollari, cioè sarebbero, allora, sì, 4.000 di dollari all'anno per ogni cittadino americano.
Ja, en wat de media ook nooit zeggen, is dat Trump eigenlijk geen enkel dollar heeft gekregen als president. Hij heeft wel 1 symbolisch dollar per jaar gekregen, maar voor de rest heeft hij gewoon alles gegeven aan national agencies of charities, goede doelen of zo.
Esatto.
Ja, en hij heeft ook geen enkel oorlog gestart. Dus dat is wel het eerste keer in de laatste 50 jaar van de geschiedenis in de Verenigde Staten. Dus ja, ideologisch gezien kan je wel zeggen, ja, Trump dit, Trump dat, bla bla. Maar als je de feiten bekijkt, de acties, het is geen slecht punt.
Certo, non se ne parla mai. Non
Nee,
se ne
dat
parla
mag je
mai.
nooit zeggen, dat mag je ook niet zeggen. Maar je moet ook eerst in je eigen land kijken, zodat je dat
Έγινε ο κόσμος μια μεγάλη φυλακή κι εγώ ψάχνω ένα τρόπο τάδες να σπάσω. Εγώ ένα μέρος που με περιμένει εκεί σε μια πολύ ψηλή κορφή πρέπει να φτάσω για αυτά πλώνω ξανά.
All right, maybe Paola, could you give a quick summary of what happened on stage?
Yeah, okay. In this extract, so you have an interview that I realized with a young Italian guy who is Italian and American. And so he's very, very, very nice guy. Okay, when I met him, I thought, very nice guy. Okay, they have a lot of stuff in common. And but talking during the conversation, I decided to ask to him, okay, if you could vote, did you vote? What do you have? Should you go vote? Sorry for my English.
No worries.
But
It's all good.
he said, no, okay, I didn't want any Trump or Hillary Clinton, but I think that he said to me that, and the actor says, I think that the accusation of racism to Trump are very wrong, and because immigration cost a lot for Americans. So okay. And after you have the girl who speaks in Flemish and who reports an interview of another guy that we met in Flanders, in Belgium, and who also said that Trump did a lot of good things, and we don't, and the medias don't talk about it, and so. Yes, and so I imagined how the two people who didn't met could communicate, and I imagined a dialogue between them, and all the materials come from interviews. And after you have a song by Pablo Spices, Kilapi, who was super rapper, Greek rapper, and who he was killed by Golden Dawn in Greece in in 2013. And yeah.
Thank you very much. And this play is also shown in connection to your project, Julian, which is Uncivil Society. So what is this project about?
Yes, so last year, together with some colleagues, we discussed what could be adequate contribution of the Goethe-Institut to the 10th anniversary of the undiscovered, how do you say? No. No. Anyhow, the 10th anniversary of the NSU, that it was discovered, or that they, undiscovered themselves. No, okay. I just don't have.
We get what you mean. Yeah.
Yes. So what could we contribute? And so we discussed, I mean, it's obvious that in Germany in the last 10 years, a lot of very precious and important work was done by anti-racist, rank and file initiatives, by cultural actors. There were a lot of contributions from the artistic scene, for instance, by giving voices to people who were not heard in the mainstream discussions in Germany. And so what we thought, what we could add, what our strong point is that we have a really good network and that we could tackle the issue on a more European level. And so we teamed up with 3 other Goethe-Instituts in different regions from Europe, in Norway, in Hungary, and also in Italy. And they together developed with local partners, local projects. And we will unite the questions a bit in a conference, which will take place on the 27th of November in the Théâtre National Wallonie-Bruxelles. And it's on the same day also Paola's play will be shown in the theater. And to Brussels, we also invited an exhibition, which is called in German, Offener Prozess, Open Trial, which is now on view in the Gorki Theater and also in Chemnitz, and which was developed by an initiative with the same name on the 10th anniversary. And talking about space, I think exhibitions are a really good example for how space can be used for counter-narratives, or an alternative space can come into existence. And this exhibition unites a lot of voices from those affected by racism. It doesn't start from the point of the view of the perpetrators, but those who are possibly affected by racism, by immigration, as something normal, which has always taken place in Germany, and so on and so forth. And there are also artistic positions dealing also explicitly with space. I think about forensic architecture, who reconstructed the internet cafe where Halit Yozgat was shot. That's by definition a really right-wing space with a lot of violence, but they used it to make a counter-investigation in order to establish a counter-narrative than the official one. And they proved that Andreas Thema, the guy who was working for the German intelligence agency, he must have that he was present during the assassination, and that he must have seen or heard or smelled something, and that that the official version is totally impossible, that he could not have, that he didn't heard what happened. And that's this would be for me also some examples what art can do. Establishing counter narratives, establishing spaces where things can be put into question.
Mm-hmm. Because also in recent years there has also, because we maybe sometimes think of the cultural scene as immune to right-wing ideologies, but there has been pressure on theaters and on artists all across Europe as well, from right-wing politicians, for example. So are these projects also ways to counter that influence, and are art institutions also contested spaces? that where we shouldn't take it for granted that they're free of these ideologies.
Right-wing movements attack theaters, attack exhibition centers if they work based on a more progressive line. Any sense or little touch of political, progressive, socialist, feminist views in the work will be attacked by a right-wing Kulturkampf, a cultural fighting, a cultural war. This means not only that right-wing ideology and right themes push into a theater or push into a museum, but it's an authoritarian, aggressive, violent fight against all those who work in a non-discriminative, in a anti-racist, in a feminist way in theaters, in concert halls, or in museums.
Yeah, and especially we've seen that in the last few years as well, women of color who as artists or journalists or activists take a step into public space are also threatened and challenged. And there's also, I think, the issue of maybe not censoring oneself. And that's why let's move on to Havin's project that she's going to show to us today. Do you want to talk about it first or show the video first? All right, so we'll show the first video first, please. Right, Havin.
Ja,
give us some context.
Okay. Ja. Unterbreche mich, weil ich so schnell bin, ja. Bei diesem Projekt geht es um den Tanz, den strategischen Tanz, der politisch ist und eine Bewegung, die sich durch Blicke, durch den Raum an sich befreien möchte. Ein Tanz, der einen Bruch darstellen soll.
So this project is about a dance that is strategic, that is a political dance, where the movement tries to conquer space in a way, and a dance that is a break.
Genau, ursprünglich ist dieser Tanz von kurdischen Frauen als Strategie eingesetzt, um quasi den Feind abzulenken bzw. auf den Feind hinzuweisen.
So originally this is a dance that was used by Kurdish women to strategically to distract the enemy or the attacker.
Ja, und darauf hinzuweisen, dass die kommen. Vielleicht ist es auch wichtig zu nennen. Also das sichtbar machen.
And to also make it visible that the attacker was coming.
Und was ich hier in Deutschland machen wollte, ist, wie kann dieser Tanz in einem künstlerischen oder in im Kunstraum gezeigt werden? Wie ist dieser Blick auf diese Frauen und deren Strategie? Und deswegen habe ich
So the project was about, so Havin was thinking about how can this dance be shown in an artistic space and how would the gaze upon these women be?
Und deswegen ist das auch ein Tanz, der in einer Skulptur endet, denn es ist Gips, was quasi zum Bruch kommt durch diese Strategie und durch diesen Tanz.
And it's a dance that kind of ends up in a culture and that breaks the culture, the sculpture through the dance.
Ja, die Ausstellung war so konzipiert, dass im ganzen Raum Gips vorhanden war, den BesucherInnen als Spur mitnehmen mussten, weil der Gips feucht war. Das heißt, wenn man reinkam, war man Teil dieses Tanzes.
And the exhibition was designed in such a way that when people came into the space was full with wet clay. So if you entered the exhibition, you became part of it because the clay would stick to you.
Genau, und die Idee war, dass diese Spuren bis nach Hause gelangen.
The idea was that you would take these traces home with you.
Genau, und das heißt, während diese Frauen diesen Tanz durch den Tanz den Gips brechen, nehmen die Besucher in diesen Gips mit, nämlich die Erinnerung an diese Strategie und an diese Übergabe.
So the women while performing, they break this clay. At the same time, people who come to the exhibition take it back home with them and take that memory back home with them. So I think that's a really beautiful example of transforming space and transforming people who come into the space in a very, not just a symbolic, but a very tangible way.
Ja, und was ich beobachten konnte, beziehungsweise was Ziel auch dieser Ausstellung war, dass dieser Tanz außerhalb der kurdischen Community verstanden wird. Deswegen ist er auch mehr oder weniger durch den Gips eigentlich, der Klang durch den Gips gegeben. Und man konnte sich nicht dem entrinnen. Man musste sich mit dem Gips und dem Bruch dieses Tanzes auch beschäftigen.
And one of the aims of the exhibition was to make this dance understandable outside of the Kurdish community. And how that was possible was because through the clay, the dance became hearable. That's how a sound was created. And that way, people who came to see the dance couldn't not notice it or not be moved by it.
Genau, vielen Dank. Und das hat mir aber nicht gereicht. Deswegen war es mir ganz, ganz wichtig, dass dieser Tanz nochmal live in einem Raum, wo die Ausstellung auch stattfindet mit diesen Frauen und mit mir selber.
And it was important to Haveen that there wasn't just the exhibition, but the dance was also to happen live with an audience.
Ja. Und der Raum, in dem das stattgefunden ist, ist ein Raum, der sehr oft von rechten Personen auch eingenommen wird, sowohl Neonazis als auch Faschisten aus der Türkei oder andere Faschisten.
So the space that Haveen chose is a space that is often where often neo-Nazis or right-wing extremists of different kind of ideologies, also Turkish nationalism, they gather in this space and hold rallies, I guess. So you wanted to bring the dance to this space to kind of reconquer the space in a anti-fascist way.
Ja, und das mit kurdische Frauen, weil dieser Tanz eigentlich ein verlorener Tanz ist übrigens, nur noch in der Erinnerung existiert. Und deswegen war es klar, dass diese Erinnerung nochmal lebendig werden muss. Also der Tanz als Strategie für Übernahme von Raum.
And the interesting thing about this dance is that it's actually a forgotten dance. It's not practiced anymore. It only exists in memory. And yeah, you've brought it back to space, to reality. And sorry, what was the second thing you said?
Wenn der Tanz den Raum auch einnimmt.
Yeah, and the dance is really a strategy to conquer, in that case, reconquer space. So we'll now look at the second video, where you see women dancing it on this place. In which city was it again?
Köln.
In Köln. Yeah, do you want to tell us a little bit how was that experience, bringing these women to that contested space?
Ja, also bei der Performance war es so, dass diese Frauen die Kleider trugen, die schon vom Gips quasi entblößt waren, aber auch nicht ganz. Das heißt, die Sichtbarkeit, dieser Blick auf diese Frauen, auf diesen Tanz war mir wichtig. Gleichzeitig war es wichtig, dass ich die Performance mit einem Kleid mache, was in Kriegssituationen auch verwendet wurde. Also dieses Kleid trage ich von einer Frau, die wirklich diesen Tanz noch vor kurzem getanzt hat, weil sie das kannte aus der Vergangenheit. Und bei mir war es so, dass der Gips komplett noch immer vorhanden war. Das heißt, während der Performance gab es wieder einen Bruch und der Gips war dann auf diesem Platz verteilt. Man konnte es mitnehmen, man konnte es drauf treten oder quasi auch verbannen. Es gab auch Leute, die wirklich sich beschwert haben, dass...
Sorry, I realized that I have to translate. Just to repeat whatever I'm missing.
Yeah.
So what she said was that the clay really got spread in that space as well. So it got spread on the floor, and the dance really left a mark. And people also complained about that.
Und genau, nur ganz kurz erklären, dass diese Performance von mir mit einem ganzen Gips stattgefunden hat, also mit einem Kleid, was aus dem Krieg quasi kam.
And you yourself performed it with a dress that was from the war and that was completely covered in a clay.
Genau. Und wir hatten in Köln quasi diese Instrumente platziert, die man nur mit Hochzeiten oder mit Festlichkeiten verbindet, die letztendlich auch boykottiert werden.
And there were instruments used in the performance that are usually only used in weddings. And what did you say about their band or their...
Genau. Und mir war es wichtig, dass in ganz Köln der gleiche Ton zu hören ist, nämlich der Ton, den die Frauen vorgeben, nämlich diesen Takt.
And it was important for her that in the whole of Cologne, this sound was hearable, the sound created by the women, that rhythm. Ja.
Genau. Und das Positive, beziehungsweise der Akt, der dann stattfand, ist, dass eine Polizistin auch kam, also diese Demonstration oder diesen Tanz eigentlich abbrechen wollte, aber es nicht passieren konnte, weil der Ton zu laut war.
And what actually happened is that the police wanted to come and break up the performance and end the performance, but they couldn't because the sound was too loud. Yeah. All right. Yeah, very, very interesting. And then maybe you can also tell us a little bit about another project that you're planning, which is also, again, about retaking, reconquering, reinscribing space in Germany.
Ja. Also ich werde in Freiburg eine Performance, also ich habe eine Performance vor mit 30 jungen Frauen, die sich mit der Architektur in Freiburg beschäftigen und mit dem Stein, nämlich...
So she's planning a performance in Freiburg where she's gonna, which she's gonna do with 30 women from Freiburg that have done research on or engaged with the architecture in Freiburg.
Genau, es sind keine Frauen aus Freiburg, ganz im Gegenteil, sind diverse Frauen, also Frauen nur mit anderer Herkunft, die in Freiburg auch ein Statement setzen, die auch rassistische Erfahrungen erfahren.
So it's women that have experienced racism and that are not from Freiburg, but of many different places.
Genau, und vor Ort werden wir Freiburg quasi durch Gesang und durch Waschung die Architektur dekonstruieren und neu definieren.
And there in Freiburg they will, through kind of washing, cleansing the stones of the city, and through singing they will change the space and reconfigure it in a way, reinscribe it.
Genau. Also die Performance in der Performance möchte ich über die Transkulturalität sprechen und dass die Transkulturalität in der Architektur manifestiert ist eigentlich.
And she wants to talk about transculturality and how that is also manifested within the architecture of Freiburg. All right, yeah, thank you very much. Many interesting projects to check out and look forward to. I think we're slowly coming to an end. Maybe the last question I want to ask is how, because we started talking about transnational space and local space. And would you say that sometimes the very local space, like how right-wing mobilization happens within neighborhoods, within little villages, how that is something we sometimes ignore in our artistic practice or our political or activist practice because we get so focused on the national, because it often seems more exciting, but at the same time we fail to reach people very locally. So do you think we sometimes have to find new ways of engaging with people, especially from cultural institutions that can be very elitist, of how to connect with the real life, everyday mobilization of right-wing extremists? So maybe we'll go around the corner. So really this idea of taking the local seriously. Yeah. Who wants to go first? Maybe we'll finish with you because you're in the room with me. Yeah.
I mean, I can once again take up the example of our colleagues from Hungary, who with their project which they did as a part of Uncivil Society, and it's really impressive because they were working with the Roma community and in the northeastern of Hungary, which is really far away, which is really small, and which are communities which are very often overseen, and they were working together with a theater group from the community, and I think this is a really good example how one could engage with very local problems. And yes, but nevertheless, I think it's a good question how, as an institution, you can reach the people who perhaps would need it. But I think, on the other hand, it's also important to strengthen those people who are already active and perhaps create new networks, create new discourses, and making this possible. But yeah, totally, you need the two, and you have to find strategies.
I would emphasize a chance. The chance is if there's a right-wing space on a local level, a problem of discrimination and racism on a local level, we on another level can mark this as a problem. We can say, oh, we are from a metropole or a big city, we are from everywhere in the country, we are on another level, we are not on this local level, but we can mark this problem, we can help those affected, those minorities who are not heard in their local region, but we can take this up and make it a big thing.
Thank you. Paola? Paola? Can you hear me still? Or not anymore? Now you can hear me again?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I just wanted to ask Paola for her answer to this not very easy question.
Yes, I agree with guys, and I think that both are important to the local situation and an international perspective. But I think that to watch at the perspective, an international perspective, can help you to better understand the local situation or the local issues. Yeah.
Thank you. And then we'll end with you, Habibi.
Ich glaube, der Zugang zu, also den Zugang zu diesem Diskurs für ZuhörerInnen oder ZuschauerInnen, die eigentlich diesen Diskurs eigentlich in dem Teilhabe sind und daran teilnehmen müssten, das fehlt.
So Havina is saying that the access to the discourse is often very difficult or impossible for people who are actually affected.
Ja. Und ich glaube, wir müssen uns mit lokalen rechten Räumen beschäftigen und die noch sichtbarer machen, als das schon geschieht. Ich sehe daran auch eine Chance. Allerdings ist diese Chance meines Erachtens immer mit einem Schleier bedeckt, der quasi immer wieder zurück zu diesen rechten Räumen führt, nämlich dass irgendwelche Diskurse unterbunden werden.
And Havina is saying we should do even more to make these local right spaces visible, but there's a problem or a shadow that always falls on these projects, which is that talking, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, talking openly about these right-wing spaces is stopped or inhibited. By whom?
Schwierig zu sagen, bei wem, aber es ist ein institutionelles oder strukturelles Problem und das ist etwas, was eigentlich schon längst sichtbar ist. Seit 14 Jahren versucht man, das sichtbar zu machen. Ich finde, das ist in den 2-3 Jahren schon geworden, aber was ich damit meine ist, wir können nicht außerhalb des Raumes schauen, wenn wir nicht diese Räume erstmal besprechen.
So Havina is saying it's an institutional or structural problem and that we can't really recognize right-wing spaces outside of our institutions, maybe if we don't first look at, that's how I understood you, look at our own institutions and how they're structured by right-wing ideas.
Also nicht ausschließen, dass man auf jeden Fall international gucken, das ist ein Problem, was weltweit ist, aber ich finde es schwierig, die rechten Räume quasi im internationalen Raum zu besprechen, wenn man nicht im eigenen Viertel darüber spricht.
Okay. Yeah, so she's saying it's difficult, or maybe we shouldn't only look at it internationally if we don't look at it in our own neighborhoods, in our own institutions and the places that we live and work in.
Ja, weil es ist viel leichter auf andere zu zeigen.
Yeah, because it's much easier to look at others. Yeah. All right, all of you, thank you so much. I think what I really took away from this discussion is that most spaces are ambiguous or contested, and that I think the work that all of you do to push back against right-wing ideologies is not gonna stop being very, very important. So thank you so much for sharing. Goodbye to Venice, and thank you very much, Haveen, for being here. And see you at the next Habibi kiosk, Habibi Goethe, I hope. Goodbye and good night.
Bye.
Bye.